When the German invasion of the Soviet Union began in June 1941, the Red Army encountered a problem that was both immediate and structural. German armored units were advancing faster than Soviet industry could replace tanks and artillery. Infantry formations were often left face to face with enemy armor without sufficient anti tank guns, without air support, and sometimes without reliable communications. The war did not allow time for elegant solutions. It demanded something crude, fast, and producible in enormous numbers. Out of this situation emerged the PTRD 41 anti tank rifle. To understand why such a weapon appeared in 1941, it is important to step back a few years. In the late 1930s, many military planners believed that the era of the anti tank rifle was ending. Tanks were becoming heavier, armor was getting thicker, and the idea of stopping armored vehicles with shoulder fired weapons seemed increasingly unrealistic. The Soviet Union itself had experimented with anti tank rifles earlier, such as the 14.5mm designs of the early 1930s, but these were abandoned in favor of anti tank guns and artillery. This decision made sense on paper. Artillery could defeat any tank while rifles could not. But this logic assumed that artillery would always be available at the point of contact. In 1941, that assumption collapsed. When German forces crossed the Soviet border, they brought with them thousands of relatively light tanks, Panzer IIs, Panzer IIIs, early Panzer IVs, and armored cars. These vehicles were not heavily protected by later standards. Many had armor thicknesses between 15 and 30 millimeters. At the same time, Soviet infantry divisions were often under strength, under-equipped, and in retreat. Anti-tank guns were lost, destroyed, or simply left behind due to lack of transport. Infantry needed something they could carry themselves, something that did not depend on horses, trucks, or tractors. The anti-tank rifle returned not because it was ideal, but because it was available. The Soviet response was unusually rapid. In July 1941, the State Defense Committee ordered the immediate development and mass production of anti-tank rifles. The requirements were simple. The weapon had to defeat the armor of current German tanks at short to medium range. It had to be cheap, robust, and manufacturable under wartime conditions. And it had to be simple enough to train conscripts quickly. Two designs were accepted almost simultaneously, the PTRD-41 and the PTRS-41. Both used the powerful 14.5 by 114mm cartridge. The PTRD-41, designed under the direction of Vasily Degtyaryov, was the simpler of the two, and that simplicity would define its entire service life. The PTRD-41 was a single-shot, bolt-action anti-tank rifle. This choice was not accidental. A semi-automatic system would have been faster to fire, but it would also have been more complex, heavier, and more sensitive to dirt and poor manufacturing quality. The Red Army in 1941 needed weapons that could be built by factories evacuated eastward, staffed by partially trained workers, and supplied with inconsistent materials. A single-shot rifle eliminated feeding mechanisms, magazines, and complex gas systems. Fewer parts meant fewer failures. The rifle itself was long, heavy, and unmistakably purpose-built. Weighing around 17 kilograms and nearly 2 meters in length, it was not something a soldier carried casually. The barrel was massive, necessary to handle the enormous pressure of the 14.5mm cartridge. A large muzzle brake was fitted to reduce recoil because without it, the weapon would have been almost impossible to fire repeatedly. Even with the brake, recoil was severe. Soldiers often described the experience as physically exhausting, especially after multiple shots. The ammunition defined the weapon more than the rifle did. The 14.5 by 114mm cartridge was originally developed for heavy machine guns, and it delivered extremely high muzzle velocity. The armor-piercing projectile relied not on explosive filler, but on kinetic energy. At close range, it could penetrate approximately 30 to 40 millimeters of armor depending on angle and armor quality. This meant that against early war German tanks, the PTRD 41 was genuinely effective. Against later tanks, it was not. Tactically, the PTRD 41 forced Soviet infantry to rethink how they engaged armor. The rifle was not meant to destroy tanks outright in every case. Instead, it was used to disable. Crews were trained to aim at vulnerable points: vision slits, hatches, side armor, rear engine compartments, and running gear. A penetrating hit could wound crew members through spalling, ignite fuel, or damage internal components. Even non penetrating hits could crack armor, damage optics, or force a tank to withdraw. The weapon was usually operated by a two-man team. One soldier fired the rifle while the second carried ammunition, observed the target, and helped with reloading. This arrangement reflected practical necessity. Each cartridge was large and heavy, ammunition supply was limited, and firing positions had to be carefully chosen. The rifle's signature, dust, noise, and muzzle blast made concealment difficult after the first shot. Crews were taught to fire, relocate, and avoid return fire from tanks and accompanying infantry. In defensive battles of 1941 and 1942, the PTRD 41 proved its value. German reports from the Eastern Front frequently mention unexpected infantry anti-tank fire. Light and medium tanks, previously accustomed to relative immunity from rifle fire, now faced a threat at close range. This forced changes in German tactics. Tanks began operating with more infantry support, maintaining greater distance from suspicious positions, and prioritizing the suppression of anti-tank rifle teams. However, the weapon's limitations became clear as the war progressed. German armor improved rapidly. By 1942 to 1943, vehicles like the Panzer IV with upgraded armor and later Panthers and Tigers exceeded the penetration capabilities of the PTRD 41 from most angles. The rifle did not evolve to meet this challenge. Its design had reached its practical limit. Increasing caliber further would have made the weapon too heavy and unwieldy for infantry use. Despite this, the PTRD 41 did not disappear. Instead, its role shifted. Against lightly armored vehicles, half-tracks, armored cars, and self-propelled guns with thin armor, it remained effective. It was also used against fortified positions, firing through brick walls, sandbags, and field fortifications. In urban combat, the rifle could engage firing ports and strong points that resisted smaller weapons. In this sense, the PTRD 41 became a general-purpose heavy rifle rather than a dedicated tank killer. Production numbers reflect how seriously the Soviet Union took this weapon. Hundreds of thousands were manufactured in a very short period. This was possible precisely because of its simplicity. The rifle did not require precision machining comparable to automatic weapons. It could be produced quickly, distributed widely, and maintained with minimal tools. In a war defined by industrial endurance, this mattered more than elegance. The human cost of operating the PTRD 41 should not be romanticized. Crews operated close to enemy armor, often within a few hundred meters. They were prime targets once detected. The weapon demanded discipline and restraint. Firing too early or from a poor angle wasted precious ammunition and exposed the crew. Training emphasized patience, concealment, and cooperation with other infantry elements. The rifle was never a lone solution. It worked best when integrated into a layered defense, combined with mines, artillery, and close-range infantry weapons. By the later years of the war, shaped charge weapons such as rocket launchers and recoilless rifles began to replace anti-tank rifles. These weapons offered greater penetration independent of velocity and did not require direct hits on vulnerable armor plates. From an engineering perspective, this marked a shift away from brute kinetic solutions toward chemical energy. The PTRD 41 represented the end of a technological line that began with the idea of scaling up a rifle to defeat armor. After the war, the PTRD 41 quickly became obsolete in frontline service. Tanks were now universally too well protected. However, the rifle did not vanish entirely. It appeared in secondary roles in training and in conflicts where armored vehicles were lightly protected. Its basic concept influenced later thinking about large caliber infantry weapons, including heavy sniper rifles designed to engage material targets rather than personnel. In retrospect, the PTRD 41 was neither a miracle weapon nor a failure. It was a product of emergency. It existed because the Red Army needed something immediately, not something perfect. Its success lay in matching a narrow set of battlefield conditions: early war armor, mass infantry formations, and an industrial system under extreme pressure. When those conditions changed, the weapon's relevance declined. The lesson of the PTRD 41 is not about firepower, but about adaptability. It shows how armies sometimes revive abandoned ideas when circumstances demand it, and how engineering simplicity can outweigh theoretical superiority. The rifle worked because it fit the moment. When the moment passed, it stepped aside, leaving behind a clear example of how necessity shapes weapons, and how weapons, in turn, shape the way wars are fought.